Alright, welcome back. So, had a little bit of a break. We're on the next video. And I want to augment, make more interesting, the material that we have applied to our plate. But I wanted to point a couple of things out. There's some questions that rolled in while I was looking away. One of them was, if you don't have your plate in the work area, your plate materials in the work area anymore, how do you go about fixing that? Because some people will say, have told me that they only see their material up here in the materials area, but they don't see it down in the work area. Think of the work area kind of like a workbench, and think of this upper area as all of the things that actually exist in your scene. And you may not necessarily want those on the workbench at any given time. So, for instance, I can hold down my right mouse button here in the work area, go to Graph, and choose Clear Graph. You'll notice the plate material disappeared from the work area, but it's not gone. In fact, it still exists both in the scene and on my objects. Also, just as a random factoid for those of you who might have been using 3ds Max once in your life, this is not the kind of thing where you can have a material only exist in your scene. If the material is anywhere, it will be found here in the Hypershade. In any event, you can take a material and you can just middle mouse drag it down into the work area. However, in most cases you won't really want to do that. Let me go ahead and go back to Graph and choose Clear Graph, because you'll probably have several different nodes feeding into this. So what I do is I hold down the right mouse button and I choose Graph Network from the marking menu, and that brings it in along with any other nodes that may be plugged into it. So what I want to do now is make this material a little more visually stimulating with the addition of a bump map. Now, is there anybody in the room right now who does not know what the term bump map means? Oh, you can tell me over inside of BuzzNet. Paul, does that mean you don't know what a bump map is? Okay, just making sure. Well, not too many people. But, say it's when you need a GPS, it fakes displacement. Yeah, that's true. So, let's take a look at bump mapping, just in general. I'm going to go back over to my magical notes. That is the best drawing of the Mona Lisa ever. I actually forgot that I made it look that awesome. A bump map is... Let's start up here. It is just going to be a texture, which again is an image, that defines bumps along a surface. Now in the last class, I actually created a really quick rendition of a simple bump map, which is floating somewhere around my document. Here it is. Oh, not you. You know, really? Control D, thank you. I know how to use Photoshop, I promise. I only teach class over it. So, a couple of things to understand about bump maps before we even get too far into the topic. Bump maps are going to be black and white. They are not going to process color information. You might be familiar with the concept of normal maps. Normal maps are another way to define bumps along a surface. They use a different process altogether. We're not going to be getting into normal mapping, but normal maps specifically make use of color. But here's what a bump map is actually going to do. It is going to define raised and lowered areas in the surface, such that black areas will be recessed and white areas will be raised. So yeah, exactly. It's a height map, but it's kind of illusionary by nature. You say white is height, but really your mid-tone is going to be 50% neutral gray. So if you want your surface to appear like it hasn't really moved, you want to use 50% gray. So, if I was to take a theoretical cross-section of a surface that looked like this, maybe going right along its equator, it should look something like this, with about this area being defined by neutral gray. Now, we are not really worried about normals, not so much. The important thing to understand is that all of this, everything I'm talking about with these raised and lowered areas, is just an illusion. It is all a trick. It doesn't really exist. As a matter of fact, if I had a polygon plane, like so, and I put this bump map on it, and I put a light over here, so here's my light, and it's shining light, we would actually be able to see a little bit of shadowing on the edge of where that lump is. However, if I took that plane and rotated it edge on, it would still remain perfectly flat. And I can prove it. Here's a fun way to prove it. Let's go back over to Maya. And you know what? Let's clear out the work area. So everybody right-click and go to Graph and choose Clear Graph. Now we're going to make a temporary material. We're going to throw it away, so don't get too attached to it. Do not fall in love with it. I want you to grab, let's do a blend because we haven't done a blend yet, right? Let's grab a blend, bring it in here. Let's name it just to be consistent. We're going to call it temp to remind me to throw this away later. Give it any color of the rainbow, something you think looks good, and apply it to your table. So your table is whatever color you just chose. In my case, it's a bright, obnoxious, horrible yellow. Next, scroll down in your list, and I want you to find the cloth texture. There it is. It's not very far down. Just use your mouse wheel. You'll get there relatively quickly. Let's just take your cloth texture and follow this very carefully. So listen. Middle mouse drag. Not left, not right, but middle mouse drag. This right on top of the material. And from the little menu that pops up, choose Bump Map. Now, that created a Bump 2D node. Don't stress that right now. His only job is just to control that normals, well, it controls the pixel normals, but it allows us to control how deep this bump looks. Now, this won't work on everybody's computer, what I'm about to do. You've been warned. So some of you might want to just click render right now, and you can see that it looks like your surface has got all these funny sort of raised areas that look kind of like weaved fabric. Now, if you have a computer that can handle this, here's a more fun way to go about it. Go into Renderer and set this to high quality rendering. Then tap the 6 key. And you can actually see that live in the viewport. Ooh. But here's where you get to see the illusion aspect of it. Rotate your table so that you can look edge on right down it. And it's flat as well, it's flatter than a pancake. In fact, it's infinitely flat. You can't get any flatter than this. Yeah, so use render if you need to, but if you have your high-quality render and if that works, then give it a shot. So that's just kind of a quick thing to show you that a bump map does some really fancy stuff, but it's all just an illusion. Incidentally, normal mapping is the same way. Now, if you want to get really fun and semi-technical, I don't want to bury you in technicalities at this stage of the game, but what a bump map is actually doing is controlling the normals, the direction that your surface is pointing on a pixel-by-pixel basis. So it's taking every single rendered pixel of your object and saying, all right, this part of the surface is actually pointing in this direction, and this part is painting in this direction, so that you can get that simulation, at least in this case, of these little rounded surfaces that go all the way around. It is very clever, and one of the interesting things, like the difference between bump maps and normal maps, where a bump map is just giving you height information, a normal map instead, and I'm not even going to look at normal maps, I'm just telling you if you want to go out and poke your face at them, just so kind of what to expect. When you see all those magical colors, each pixel gets a color value that translates to a vector. So literally a direction in X, Y, and Z space, which is why it uses red, green, and blue. Well, of course, all pixels use red, green, and blue, but that's why you see all those multiple colors. And that color information tells the renderer to simulate what direction that pixel is, using finger quotes here, actually facing. Not that the pixel is actually facing any given direction, but we're going to simulate that. So where a bump map gives you height information, a normal map gives you the angle that each pixel is facing. So there's the primary difference between the two. So once you're happy, once you're satisfied, and you think that you've seen what bump maps have to offer, oh, let me show you one more thing. This is just because it's cool and because it's fun. Let me go to Create, go to Lights, and make a point light. And let me get the Move tool out. I'm just going to move this around. Let me move it up above the table too. So there you go. Now watch this. Hit 7, and then move this around. So you can see it respects lighting, which that's pretty amazing and fun. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. Let's get out of lit mode and jump back over here. I don't need any of this, so I'm going to nuke it all. Goodbye. Now we do need to get Lambert 1, which is my default material, reapplied to the table. So I'm just going to select the table, right click, and choose Assign Existing Material and choose Lambert 1. You don't have to do that though. If you want to leave your table black for now, that's fine. We're going to make a material for it here in just a few minutes. Okay, so now we know what bump maps are, we know how they work. Here's what I want you to do. Go back up to your materials area. So hit your upper tab, or you can show both tabs if you want to. I want you to right click on Matte Plate and choose Graph Network to bring it down to the work area, then just show the work area once again. So basically, the long and short of it is I just want Matte Plate in your work area. Next, in this list on the left, scroll down until you see Noise, like so. And we're going to middle mouse drag, again, middle mouse drag right on top of Matte Plate and choose Bump Map. And there you go. Now you can see what that's doing on my end because I have high quality viewport cranked up. And it's not pretty. It's not a plate I would ever put food on, frankly. Looks kind of terrible, to be honest. But here's how we're going to fix that. If you select your noise node, it should be called noise 1 or noise 2, depending on how many you've created recently. Do you see these flat spots that I have? Now, again, you may not see those because you may not have high-quality rendering. In that case, just rest assured that they are there. You have these areas that look like they have flattened out. We want to get rid of those, and we're going to do that by lowering the amplitude. So we pull that down to about mid-gray, and suddenly we don't have any flat spots anymore. Next, we need to go over to the Place 2D Texture node, which should be attached directly to your noise. It should have come with it by default. Within the properties, or I'm sorry, within the attributes, I should call them attributes, we'll see Repeat U and Repeat V. And let's see, Marilyn says, I do not have the bump map choice. Give me just a moment. Take Repeat U and V and set that to 5 by 5. Now let's hold there. Now, Marilyn, let's run back through this real quick. If you take a noise and you middle mouse click, not right mouse, not left mouse, but middle mouse drag on top of your material, let's see, you get something like this, right? Where it just says Other. This is a bug. It does happen sometimes. Here's what I want you to do. Just click away. And then you can rearrange these guys. So you have your Place 2D text and your noise 1. So you got that? Next, just take your noise node and just middle mouse drag this on top of Matte Plate, and you should be able to see bump map. So you're just going to make the connection after the fact. Can't find noise. Well, commando. I would start by scrolling down very carefully because these are in alphabetical order but then sorted by type. So we have materials first, and then we get into all of our textures. So when you start seeing things like fractal and grid and Mandelbrot and mountain, that's where you get to noise. You also have a search field, so you could just type noise, and there it is. I just see Blinn and Lambert. All right. Well, then that tells me that over here in your other list, you've probably clicked something like surface. And you don't want to do that. You want to just set this all the way up to the Maya level. if search doesn't work again, I'm going to go with you've jumped over here to this other list and you've clicked surface, and that's all you're looking at. Okay, so now, moving back along, I need to get this kind of re-established. I'm going to jump back over to my noise, take amplitude, pull it down to around 0.5. It's not an exact science. Doesn't need to be. And then take your place 2D texture node and set repeat U and V to 5 by 5. Carl, did you get that squared away? Commando, 182? Just found bump. Just found bump. What? Ah, how do you link bump to matte plate? Wait a minute there. Carl, you've called my attention over fully. We just need to see your screen. Because you are not where I need you to be. So let's get you there. All right. Carl. Okay, so you found noise. You also hand-made a bump 2D node by the look of it. Delete that. Middle mouse drag noise 1 onto matte plate. Choose bump map. There you go. Voila, you are caught back up and everybody is happy. Alright, now, next, don't worry about your bump depth right now. Select your noise 1 node. Pull amplitude back to around 0.5. Okay, take your place 2D node. Place 2D texture node. There you go. Set repeat U and V to 5 by 5. There you go. Not 0.5, but 5. Very, very good. Okay, cool. So you're all back to where you need to be. Now, if you need to go ask another question over in the question panel, make sure that you choose Ask Staff, because you have a slightly different status now that you've been a presenter. Okay, so now, we're going to take our plate and make it look a little bit nicer. Jump into your bump 2D node, take your bump depth, and pull that way down. Now, I'm going to put mine at about 0.03 or so. And you see that's just giving me these really soft bumps on the surface. You can make that softer or more pronounced as taste, permits, however you want it to actually look. So there it is at about 0.2. But I want to show you this. If you hit render right now, oh yeah, and let me double check my material and make sure that we have some reflectivity. In fact, let me crank up reflectivity for a minute. And, well, that should be enough to get it done. There you go. Take a really close look right here. You can actually see the reflection of the cake is getting perturbed by that bump. So just kind of a neat thing and an explanation of why we're doing this. So it's subtle, especially with the fact that I'm leaving my reflectivity pretty low, all things considered. In fact, I just cranked it up for that example. I want mine at about 0.3, but it is kind of a nice little addition, and it shows you some neat stuff. Okay, so with that, we have our material for our plate finished. I want to go ahead and do a quick ready check to see who's got that done. All right, so we've got our plate material done. The next material I want to create is the one for the table. So, everyone, if you would please, right-click in your Hypershade, go to Graph, and choose Clear Graph. And wipe out the work area. Next, let's create a new Fong. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag a Fong into the work area as opposed to clicking on it. And you can control double-click if you'd like to. Just in whatever way you prefer, go ahead and rename this material. And we'll call this matte _ table. So who's getting video lag? Right now you should see me wiggling this material around. Okay. Well, I don't have anything fancy running on this computer that I don't normally have. All right, I'm going to pause the video for just a moment. Okay, we are back. There was a brief technical thing because apparently the high-quality renderer was lagging down our connection, which is interesting. Really because I haven't seen that one before. But let me go ahead and get back on topic. So we've created matte table. We haven't done anything with it. But here's what I want you to do with it, okay? First off, the color. We're not going to do anything fancy with the color in here. We're going to apply a texture. Here's how you do that in Maya. In your big list of various things, you should see file listed amongst all of your various textures. Middle mouse drag in a file node. Now, file's going to come in with a place 2D texture node. Just bring that into the work area. Go ahead and rename that using any method you like. You can rename it here in the attribute editor. You can use the status line by setting the little area over here to rename, or you can just control double click on it. There's a lot of different ways to go about that. We're going to rename file 1 to text_table. Then, I want you to select text table, and you'll see in your attribute editor there's image name with a little manila envelope next to it. Click that, or folder, excuse me. And that should jump right to your source images folder. Select furniture, base wood. And just double click that. Is there anybody who does not have that file? Tell me now, because we actually mentioned it at the very beginning of the video to go get that file. Oh, it looks like everybody's got it. Oh, you weren't here for that part. Ah, you came in midway. All right, well, what you need to do, well, hang on, do you have it? Okay, yeah, just jump over to the streaming, the streaming files, streaming video support files thread over in the member sponsor lounge. And that should hook you up. If you see anything in your screen that looks a little different, maybe it doesn't look quite as nice as mine, that's probably a video card feature. I probably have a nicer video card than you do. Okay, so once you have that furniture base wood set into your file node, I want you to middle mouse drag your file node on top of matte table and just choose color. It's very easy. Even if you're taking a second to catch back up, middle mouse drag on top of your material and just choose color. And I'll give everybody a second to catch up to that. So you should have this texture applied to your material. Now, the next thing I want you to do is middle mouse drag this texture back on top of your material again. This time choose bump map. The first one was color, the second one is bump map. Very, very quick thing. Now, I've got to turn on my high quality render for a moment, but first go ahead and middle mouse drag this onto the surface of the table. And even in default, you should see the wood grain. But if I go to render and just turn on high quality, even temporarily, you can see what this bump is going to look like. Grab your bump 2D node, and if you set it down to really low values, you see it starts to look pretty nice. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, folks. Also, at least play with setting it to a slightly negative number. And if you want this to look like a real table, you're going to want to leave this very, very low. So I've got it to negative 0.038, and even that, I mean, that doesn't look furniture polished, but it does look like a wood table, and the wood grain is showing up kind of nicely. So I would call this even an extreme bump under these circumstances, but it's kind of nice, so I'm going to go with it anyway. Now the only other thing, and this is just personal preference, is to increase the tiling a little bit. So over in the Place 2D Texture node, if I tile this just a couple of times in V, so repeat UV set to 1 and 2 respectively, it just tightens up the wood grain a little bit. So once again, those settings are bump depth at negative 0.03-ish, or 0.04. And in the Place 2D Texture node, we set repeat U and V to 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick ready check for folks to catch up to this point. Awesome, let's continue. So the next material we're going to create, because really that's it for the table, we don't really need anything else, is we're going to create the material for the cake. So once again, I want you to right-click, go to Graph, and clear your graph. Now, same as before, we're going to create another Fong material. The reason I like Fong is that it's nice for plasticky sort of glossy things. It's also lighter on the system than a Blinn. I mean, not by much, but every little bit, you know? Now let's go ahead and rename this. We'll call this matte_cake. And I'll just immediately assign this to my cake. So now as I make changes, we'll see updates. If I get laggy again, somebody smack me over inside of BuzzNet. Because I haven't seen that before or since. It could have been any number of things, but I'm not sure. Okay, now we need to bring in another file. So I want you to scroll down and find the file texture one more time, and just middle mouse drag that in, just like we did before. Go ahead and rename this, so we'll call this tex_cake. And I don't want you to plug this into the color at all. In fact, just plug this into bump map. So middle mouse drag this onto the material and choose bump map. Now, of course, nothing's going to happen because we don't have any textures in here. So select your text cake node, click on the little folder, and grab Tex Flame Base. This is actually a cheap texture I made years ago for the Unreal books that I thought looked vaguely like a wall of fire. I used Fong, not Blinn. But, I mean, you could use a Blinn if you really, really wanted to. Now, there's a pretty good chance that your cake now looks something like this. Meaning it looks interesting on top, but then gross on every other side. Here's how we're going to fix that. Select your cake. Well, yours could have any number of different types of samples, but if it doesn't look good, select your cake, press F3 to go to your polygon menu set, and jump to Create UVs, and I want you to do a spherical map. That's really it. Now, you can take your Place 2D texture node and you can repeat it. Say if I repeat this to, well, not in V, I suppose. Let's leave that at 1. Carl, that's probably just Carl says, for some reason the bump map doesn't show in viewport even though I press 6. If you're still using the default renderer, it won't. The default renderer doesn't support live bump mapping in the viewport. High quality renderer does, and that's really only if your video card happens to support it. So really, that's probably a video card issue and has nothing to do with a Maya issue. So I'm going to take repeat U and set that to 2, and that looks much better. Okay, so that gives us the surface texture that we want. It kind of does look like, a knife was sort of dragged through this, which is pretty cool. And if you're wondering how I created this texture, I made it inside of ZBrush a long time ago. This is an older version of ZBrush. And there was a tool that worked very much that way, where it really was kind of like dragging a knife through, something sticky, like silly putty that kind of clung to the knife as you dragged it through. So I just did that a lot, and then made it tileable. Okay, so we've got that. You may play with things like bump depth, if you want this to be a lot more pronounced or less pronounced. Honestly, though, a value around 1 will probably do exactly what we want it to, which is great. Next, let's go to the material itself, and we're going to change the color around. Now, I want this to look like chocolate icing, so just make a chocolate color. You start with orange, and essentially brown is really just a dark orange color. So pick any kind of dark brown that you like. Maybe something about like so. Next, we need to change how shiny this is. The default values just don't look supremely convincing in my opinion. So I'm going to take my cosine power and I'm going to pull that way down. Now, I'm going to use a value around let's try to get around 3. You're going to find, and this is just from, I've actually made a few cakes, and I think if you think about it, you'll remember this is how it works. Wet icing, or icings that stay very wet, will have a higher cosine power, where like your typical basic out of a plastic jar icing is going to have a much wider specularity because it starts to dry out. Raven, if you can't find brown, remember that brown is just a dark orange. So start with orange and darken it up a bit, and you'll get brown. So we've got 3.65 on my cosine, and then pull your specular power, your specular color way down. I've got mine to, not quite all the way, somewhere between a quarter of the way along and half. Just darkening that up a little bit. I'm also pulling my reflectivity off. No reflectivity. My cake does not need to be reflective in any way. And that's the bulk of it right there. I mean, we are pretty much done. Now, there's one more thing I'm going to add. Primarily, I'll just admit, this is primarily for academic purposes. This is just because it's kind of fun. But let me jump over to Photoshop and explain what it is we're about to do. Our icing, right now, let me find my stylus real quick. Our icing has a lot of these swirls and whatnot that are carved into it everywhere. And if we took a cross-section of any one part, we'd have these raised areas, and then inside the swirls, we would dip down, like so. Now, generally, when you're icing a cake, these raised and flattened areas are because a knife was dragged across that, or some sort of device that smoothed out the icing. Inside of the recessions, though, I want to add some lumps and bumps. So I want some irregularities in between where the knife strokes were. This is really just a way for me to show you how to combine two bump maps together. Yeah, and if you like the idea of inverting the bump, that's totally fine. It's one of those things where, I think it looks better this way, but your mileage may vary, so whatever works for you. If you want to take it and flip it to -1 and you think that looks more like your icing is supposed to look, then there you go. So it's really up to you. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to take my Hypershade for the time being and make it much bigger. And get a little bit more room up here. We need to make a second bump map. And here's how we're going to go about it. Grab a noise. So just like we did before, just middle mouse drag a noise into the work area. And before I get any further along, let me do a quick ready check to see who's made it up to this point. Alright, so you got your new noise in place. I would immediately go ahead and take the amplitude and pull that back down to around 0.5 so you don't get any more of those white flattened areas like what we were getting before. So again, pull your amplitude down to 0.5 or below. Next, this is where it gets kind of fun. Middle mouse drag this on top of the cake and choose bump map just like you did before. Now, Maya does not allow you to plug two different things into the same attribute. So what just happened is we replaced the bump map, as we can see on my cake right now. Incidentally, that you can see the seam here. However, we are going to be animating with Z pointing in the forward direction. So if you look at my little coordinates here on the lower left corner of my screen, if I rotate the camera like so that Z is pointing in the direction that I think the animation should run, that seam is on the back. It's then invisible, meaning I don't care. Also, because this texture is going to be just inside the crevices of our material, seams will go unnoticed anyway. So I guess I should point that out as well. Alright, so now next, let's go to our Place 2D texture node on the noise, and let's kick up our repetition quite a bit. Let's say we go to 3x3. So there you go. All kinds of little bumps, or I mean you could even go probably maybe 4x4. Lots of little bumps everywhere. Now those bumps are really extreme, so I'm going to pull down the bump depth to, that looks pretty good. That's about 1.88 or 2, I suppose, or 0.2, excuse me. So once again, we repeated U and V to 4x4. Noise node itself is amplitude of 0.5 or less, and then the bump node has a bump depth of about 0.2. Okay, another quick ready check to see who's got to this point. Now, I did get an interesting question. Somebody said, if I change my my work area to some other material and then change back, you probably lost a pretty good chunk of your material, being your original bump map. That's because they're not connected. Maya has no way of knowing that there's an association between these nodes. So let's show you what happens when you do that. So I can come up here and maybe graph out this network. And then if I come back to Matt Cake and I graph the network, oh no, I'm suddenly missing nodes and that's really stressful. End of my life. At this point, go ahead and uninstall Maya. No, I'm just kidding. If you show both your tabs, the work area and the materials area, you'll notice the top area is really, this is the tab area. Notice tabs only. So set this over to textures. You can grab your material here, like so. You also have a bump 2D node under utilities. Now it is going to be a little bit tricky to figure out which one of these you want. So the way I would do it, since we didn't rename those, here's a great, another example of why you should rename probably all of your nodes, but I'm keeping renaming to a minimum. But we can take our text cake. We can right click and choose graph and say add selected to graph. Okay? So now we've brought that back in. But we're still not seeing its Place 2D texture node. We're not seeing its bump node. That's just Maya. It's only adding what we told it to add. So here's how I fix that. Select Matte Cake, hold down Shift, select Text Cake, and right here you have Show Input and Output Connections. There's everybody, including the shader group, which we don't really need to see right now. But there's our Place 2D texture node for our fire and for our noise, all visible right there. So it's really a two-part thing, just to kind of show you. I can select these, right-click, and I can remove them from the graph as well. There was a time when Maya would crash when you'd do that. I'm so glad those days are over. Yes, thank you. Alt-Z does step back to what we had, but let me step back even further to here. So we can go back to our original material, right-click and graph the network on the cake. So there's everything but what wasn't connected. Go grab the thing we need to connect, And now just middle mouse drag it down into the work area. That's even faster. And then just show in and out connections. No, we cannot have a break just yet. I'm sorry. We're only 39 minutes into this video, so I've got to go just a little bit further. My matte cake lost the color and I can't click on it. Of course it did. But that's probably because you mapped something to it. If you... Here's what I want you to do, Marilyn. If you take a look at your matte cake, if you see a line going into it, do any of these lines... See, when you mouse over them, it tells you what it's connected to. Are any of them connected to color? Or here's another way to look at it. If you select matte cake and take a look at your color attribute, do you still see a checker over here, or do you see a little tiny black arrow in a box? If you see a black arrow with a little box, that means that you have plugged something into color. Yeah, if you see black arrow in a box, that means what you did, most likely, is you took your noise and you did this. You middle mouse dragged in and you connected it to color. That's not what you want to do. I really wish I could see your screen, Marilyn, but because you're running on two separate monitors, I don't have the ability to help you really in any way except by voice. So... give me a moment, Marilyn. I've got a question. I've got somebody who just says they're having trouble with their texture. I'm going to take a look at their screen, and when I come back, we'll move on from there. But if you really, let's see here. It would be really, I think we may need to consider making just a solid requirement that you run the webinar on the same machine. Oh, you're on the same monitor, so I can look at your screen? Because you weren't for a very long time. Let me switch back over and just have a look at what you got. Hey, Marilyn. Hey, look, I can see what you're doing now. That's awesome. Okay, let's see here. Marilyn, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, I can hear you too. Okay, so let's see here. If I do, let me try something here with the webinar software real quick. Ah, there we go. So I'm requesting keyboard and mouse control. And that's your webinar software bouncing up and down on the lower part of your screen because I just requested that. And am I getting something? I think I am. Ooh,
yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, when you mouse over these connections, and I'm getting really, really sluggish feedback, you can generally see what you're plugged into, but I don't even need to look. What you've done here is you've taken your noise and you've connected it over to color. That's not what we're doing.
Okay.
So, I want you to select this connection, and I'm having a difficult time clicking on that line. I'm sure it's just sort of a lag thing. So select that line connecting between your noise and your material. When it turns yellow, hit the delete key and nuke that out. Next.
Okay.
Next, middle mouse drag from your noise back onto your cake, or cake material.
To the cake material
Yes,
or the cake?
the cake material. Now choose bump map. There you go. That's all we were doing.
Okay.
Now there's something else I want you to take a look at. I want you to select your cake up in the viewport. And if you would, kindly switch over to the channel box. Actually, we don't even need to do that. I see everything we need to do. Press F3 if you haven't. Ooh, you don't have your menus showing at all. Oh, okay. Sorry, Mac. I'm losing my mind. Press
That's a Mac.
Yeah. Press F3. Go up under Create UVs.
Oops.
To the right.
Create UV.
Create UVs. To the right. Your other right. There you go. Now choose spherical mapping. There you go. Now just press F8. Press it again.
Wait.
And click away. There you go. Okay, so that fixes that. Okay, aside from making your material brown again, which should work now, so go click on your material, your cake material.
Click on my- Okay.
You should now be able to change the color to any shade of the rainbow.
Okay.
See, what you'd done is you'd plugged your noise into your color channel. Then when you try to change the color, that's like sending Maya mixed messages, because you've essentially said, hey, I want the noise to define the color, and Maya says, okay, that's fine. Now you can't actually define your own color. The noise is doing that for you. That's why you weren't able to select colors prior.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. All right, I'm going to set myself back to presenter for just half a second. Now, Marcus. Oh, you're good, Marcus? Okay, good. Well, then I'll just continue. All right, so let's jump back over here. I'm going to take my noise, plug that back into the bump map, like so. And let me go ahead and make sure stuff is muted over here. Excellent. Let me pull my bump 2D value back down to about 0.2, whatever works. Let me take my color, set that back over to brown. The last time I made a brown, it's still there, so I can just click on that. That's, of course, very nice. Now, here's where things get a little bit fun. What we want to do, and I'm going to hide out my shader group node, we just don't need it, so, well, thanks anyway, Alt-Z. Right-click, and well, if I right-click on that, it doesn't like it, so I need to select it and right-click out here in space, go to Graph, and just choose Remove Selected from Graph. Okay, good. And I'm going to reorganize things just a little bit. I want my flames up here, and that's what I'm calling it anyway, and my noise down below. Now we're going to do something kind of fancy. Just to kind of show you how something works, I want you to take a moment and just disconnect both of your bump maps. I want both of these floating in space, ready to be connected, but in fact connected to nothing. We're going to create a brand new node. So scroll way down, and you're going to find Blend Colors. So just middle mouse drag that right in between these two, and then or just place it right in between like so. It will help a little bit if you lay out your nodes something similar to what I have. It will make following along much easier for you. I believe. That's just my opinion. Now, even though I just spent all that time to make my colors brown, I want to plug this into color just as a way to show you how the blend color node works. Watch this. Middle mouse drag blend colors, drag it right on top of matte cake. Choose color from the menu. Your cake should turn purple, and I want to do a really quick ready check for people to catch up to this point. Okay, so now that you have this in here, take a look at the properties for blend color and look at what you have. You have color 1, which by default is red, color 2, which by default is blue, and you have a slider for blender that you can slide back and forth, and watch what happens as you do. Pretty cool, huh? So, I do want to point something out, though. Something that it's a little, bugs me a little bit. Nobody asked me when they were designing this node how it should actually work. Let me not jump over here so quick. Take a look at your blender right now. Slide it all the way over to 0. Which color is being shown? Color 2. Now slide it over to 1, and which one is being shown? Color 1. Exactly. To me, that's backwards. I really feel like 0 should be the equivalent of 1, and 1 should be the equivalent of 2, because all you're doing is shifting from a 0-based system to a 1-based system. But they didn't think so. They think 1 should be equal to color 1, which means that color 2 is now equal to 2. I'm sure there were programmers out there who were frustrated by that. But I want to write it down because it's important. A value of 0 equals color 2. A value of 1 equals color 1. Now I'm going to tell you some universal truths about the numbers 0 and 1. They relate to a lot of different things. 0 and 1. 0 is generally equal to false. 1 is generally equal to true. They're also equal to colors. Take care, Paul. 0 is equal to black, and 1 is equal to white. Why is this important to us? We have a texture which is black and white, so keep that in mind. 1 is equal to white, 0 is equal to black. Okay, Zach, take over my screen, please. That's coming in from Raven, who seems to be having some sort of trouble which cannot possibly be defined in the English language. So I'm just going to take over his screen and figure out what's up. Oh, you're okay now? Oh. Okay, well, good. All right, well then I'm not going to take over your screen. Oh, I didn't see what the problem was, though. Okay, because if you put it over in BuzzNet, I didn't see it. All right, so let's go ahead and just move on. So again, Blender, 0 is color 2, 1 is color 1. We've already seen that. Let's jump back over to Maya. We're going to do something kind of fancy, and here's what we're going to do. I want you to take your fire texture up here and plug this into color 1. Now, I'm not actually talking... Hang on, stop. Whatever you just did, don't do it, or undo it. Let me be a little more precise. Do you see the bump 2D node that is sticking out of your fire texture? Middle mouse drag that onto blend colors 1 and choose color 1. So what you're actually plugging in is the bump 2D node, not the node itself. Next, take the bump 2D node that is connected to your noise, plug that into color 2. If you need reassurance, so the bump nodes for the fire texture, or the big thick icing texture, that's going to go into color 1. And the one for your noise is going to go into color 2. Just keep that in mind. Now, how do you know you got it right? Well, you can double check it like so. If you can take your blender and slide it towards 0, and if you take a close look at this, it does kind of represent what your noise looks like. And so if we go all the way over here, you can kind of see the swirls of your icing. Now, all of those wacky colors, if both colors turn blue, you can see right here on the screen, both of my colors are blue. I'm just really looking at what's going on the screen, and yours may not feed back. But as long as you plugged your fire texture into color 1, or the bump from your fire texture into color 1, and the bump from your noise into color 2, then you're perfect. Right now we're plugging it into color just to prove a point. We're not going to leave it there, obviously, because that makes for a really weird psychedelic cake. Okay. Now what we need is a map. We need a bump map. I'm sorry, let's not say a bump map. I need an image that does the following job. Do you remember what I wanted? It's actually defined right here on the screen. I wanted lumps and bumps in all the crevices, but I wanted the top areas to remain flat, right? So what I need is an image that gives me color 1 at the raised areas and color 2 at the lowered areas. So that up here we have our flame and down here we have our noise. I already have an image that does that. Can anybody tell me what it is? I need something that is basically, I'll help out. I need something that is white up here and black down here. The fire texture itself already does the job. So here's where we get to have a little bit of fun. Jump back over to Maya, and here inside your work area, take your fire texture and the texture node itself, not the bump node. I'm going to move the bump node out of the way. take the texture itself and middle mouse drag that on top of your blend colors. And oh my goodness, I can't connect that to the blender. What's wrong? What's the problem? I want you to go to Other. You can also choose Shift Drop if you want to. But middle mouse drag on top of the blend colors and choose Other. This brings up the connection editor. This allows us to make connections in between two separate nodes. Now, by default, this is going to go from left to right. If you've been playing with the connection editor previously in the past, you might have flipped that, but that's entirely your world. We want ours to go from left to right. I want you to take out alpha and plug that into the blender. So what we're doing, earlier we had that slider that allowed us to say, I want to look at color 1 or color 2. By plugging a texture in here, we're able to let the texture define where color 1 is going to show up and where color 2 will show up. So again, we're taking out alpha, which is just a black and white version of our texture, which is already black and white. It's just that the colors themselves consist of red, green, and blue. And we're going to plug that into the blender. For bonus points, and this is just for extra food for thought for those who might need it, you can also take something just like OutColor R and plug that into the blender as well. It's going to do exactly the same job. Okay. So, really quick ready check to see who's got this. Okay, so we're back, and I'm now taking a look at my cake. All I did was just move my viewport into place so we can see that. Now, obviously, we can't let our cake remain this crazy psychedelic color. So, go ahead and delete the connection between your blend colors and your cake. And if you want to, go ahead and set that material back over to your shade of brown. Now, we want this blend color to drive our bump map, but we're going to do this in sort of a fancy way. If you were to middle mouse drag from blend colors onto matte cake and choose bump map, it automatically creates another bump 2D node, but it doesn't know what to plug stuff into. It gets really confused. It has no idea how to use this data. We can't do that. So don't do that. I'm going to delete out that bump 2D node. Instead, middle mouse drag from your blend color node on top of your material, and once again choose Other. A shortcut for that, for those who need that sort of thing, is to hold down Shift and middle mouse drag from one node to another, and that'll automatically bring up the connection editor. Is that enforced without an apply? I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, you mean inside the connection editor? Oh, as soon as you click on the opposite side, that's it. The connection is in place and working. You'll notice there's no apply button. Okay, so once again, shift middle mouse drag from your blend node onto matte cake. Take your output and scroll way down, and you should see normal camera. This is actually the attribute that your bump 2D nodes plug into. So go from output into normal camera, like so. And in my viewport, everything's gone a little bit crazy. So let's do a quick test render. And if you look really closely, in all of those recessed areas, I've got some lumps and bumps showing up. If you don't have Hey, Carl, what version of Maya are you running right now? If you don't mind my asking. Carl just said he doesn't have normal camera. In 2013. All right. Well, if you don't see normal camera for some reason, do this. So middle mouse drag. I'm sorry, I did a shift middle mouse to bring up the connection editor. One, look closely. I can't stress that enough. Make sure you look closely, because I've more than once just felt like I just didn't see something and swore it wasn't there, and somebody comes along, just points at my screen and says, hey, it's been right there in front of you the whole time. So one, verify that it's not there. Also, if you need to, make sure that Up in your right display menu, turn on Show Hidden. It shouldn't be hidden, but if it is for some reason, that should show it. Yeah, do not use MI normal camera. Just regular, plain Jane, normal camera. Tell me, did you have to turn on Show Hidden, or was it just there and you hadn't seen it, Carl? Okay. Carl, you need to look more closely. Okay, I'm sorry, I've just been dying to use that. That's from Llamas with Hats, which I can't really recommend anybody watch. Okay, so, there we go. We are done. Now, of course, you can tweak this to your heart's content. You can make one texture repeat a little more, or play with this as much as you like, but that's it. That is the length and breadth of all of the materials I wanted to show. There is only one more thing I want to do, and it's just for fun. This is for you Maya 2013 people, which I'm going to assume is pretty much everybody, but maybe not. Some of you might be using Maya 2012 or something like that. This is just kind of a bonus for shiggles. If you don't know what shiggles are, then just take it with you. So let's right-click on my table. I'm going to select my table, right-click, and go down to Assign Existing Material and drop Lambert 1 back onto it. So I have a plain Jane table once again. Next, in my Panels area, I'm going to go to Layouts. Not Layouts. I'm going to go to Panel. Thank you. Sometimes my brain does that. So go to Panels, jump to Panel, and choose the Node Editor. We're going to make a material for the table, or basically the same material we made prior, in the Node Editor this time, instead of in the Hypershade. Alright, now the Node Editor teaches you the only thing you really need to know. It says press Tab to create a node. Well, that's cool. So, here's how we're going to do this. Press the Tab key. By the way, guys, this is kind of the end of the lecture. I'm not going to be doing ready checks for this part. I'm going to go at a steady pace. If you miss something, don't worry. It'll all be repeated in the video, because we're right at the end, and I kind of need to move stuff along. Oh, and everybody save right now. Just because Raven had a crash. And that reminds me to save. To hit Control-S. That just kind of goes back to like when I was teaching in physical classrooms. Anytime anybody in the room would go, "Oh no!" you'd hear a whole bunch of all across everybody's keyboards while everybody spammed Control-S. Okay, so press Tab here inside the Node Editor, and I want you to create a Phong material. Just type PHONG, and you'll see it in the list. Now this is a two-part process. You need to click on Phong and then press Enter. Now, you're given the same material node you had before. If you select it, it shows you the exact same attributes. This is just another way to visualize it. What the node editor is a combination of the hypergraph, the hypershade, and the connection editor all rolled up into one happy little customer. Just to show you something real quick, each of these nodes can be visualized in 3 levels of detail. By default, this is full detail. This shows all attributes we could plug into or out of. If you click on this little tiny icon up in the corner, you can just switch this to only showing the fact that these nodes are connected. Basically, you're hiding all attributes. You only see a wire because there's some sort of data being passed from one node to the next. You can set it to kind of the medium level, which is just showing those things that are connected. Good night, Joppy. Or you can set it to full. We're going to leave ours at full for the time being. I'm going to hold down the right mouse button and choose Rename, or you could rename this over inside the attribute editor, doesn't matter. We're going to call this mat underscore table underscore NE for node editor. So this will be the node editor version of this material. Next, I need to bring in my texture. So we're going to bring in another file. So over here, just anywhere, it's going to read where your mouse is. So put your mouse somewhere, type Tab, and type in File, and you should see File Texture. Click on that. And press Entrée. Press Enter. Alright, let's also rename this. So I'll call this text underscore table underscore any. Now here's how you make a connection. We take the out color of our file node and we connect that to the color of our material. Now currently we don't have any textures in here, so I guess we should go ahead and select our texture node, click on our little folder, and bring in furniture base wood. We've done that a couple of times now, so that should be okay. If your default seems to be collapsed, I would double check these buttons that you have up here at the top. So deselect all of your nodes, so click out here in space, and then up here at the top you can set all of them at once. Alright, so again, just to show everybody how that works, you can just take the out color, drag out, plug that right into color. If you need to delete that, just select the wire and hit delete. That's like snipping it away. And we can just middle mouse drag this right onto the surface of the table. It does exactly the same job. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting. If we take out alpha and we plug this into bump map, which I need to kind of scroll down so I can see that. Actually, we can't. You'll notice there is no bump map. But earlier, I told you that a bump map is actually fed into normal camera, and you can't make that connection. Out alpha will not just plug into normal camera. This is where the node editor requires a little more work on your part and a little more know-how. You need a bump 2D node. So hit tab and type bump, and there's bump 2D right there. Press enter. Now here's where people will get confused. It happens all the time. It's difficult to remember which thing you need to plug into, either bump depth or bump value. Take a look at the node. Your texture is always going to feed into the upper value, or the upper attribute, which is bump value. So we're going to take out alpha and plug that into bump value, like so. And then we'll take our out normal and plug that into normal camera. And we've just made a bump map. All right. Now, I'm not seeing the bump actually behaving here on my screen, and I'm just trying to get to the bottom of Hawaii. So let me take a look and figure out why that's being silly. Oh, let me try this real quick. Nope, it's not that. And that's not responding. I also want to double check a render, make sure it's not rendering out with any kind of bump. And it doesn't seem to be. Well, that's interesting. Let me try another approach. Let me take my out color R, which you'll notice the out color is expandable. So I can expand that, take out color R. Let me plug that into bump value and see what that does. Okay. For some reason, it doesn't like out alpha here in the node editor. It was indeed using out alpha over in the Hypershade, but that's Maya being herself. So now I can just take my bump depth, set that to negative 0.03, and I essentially have the exact same material, just constructed here inside the node editor. And there we have it. Now, this leads us to your homework for next week, which, do I even have a clear space? Here's a little space over here in the corner where I can write stuff. I need to see materials on all of your objects, and I want to point out early on, submissions. You will submit by making a JPEG render of each object. If you don't know how, here's how. Up to this point, you have all, each one of you, at some point, taken an object and you've probably hit the render button. Make sure you're in mental ray, it will help. So what you're going to do is find a nice angle that shows off your material. Maybe for the table you just get something kind of like so. You'll render that. And, you know, in this case, if I really wanted to show off that it had a bump, I might rotate it such that the default specular highlight was kind of in the scene. So you can kind of see that bump. So you make it a little more apparent. Use the camera to your advantage. When you're done, just go to File, Save Image. Tell it where you want to save. You'll notice by default it's probably set to JPEG. If it's not, set it back to JPEG. These are what you will submit. Now, pay attention to where they're saving to. They are saving into your images folder within your project. You're going to need to know that so that you can get them moved over into the proper Dropbox location. Okay, so you will do JPEGs to show us this. This is so that you don't have to send a Maya file along with textures, and we don't have to make all sorts of associations for files and things like that. So let's go back over to your homework list. You'll submit JPEGs for the following objects: your plate, cake, and table. Now those are easy. Those are already done if you followed along. So that's good. Less work you have to do. Next, you will make a material for your cherry. That'll be all you. You'll make one for your whipped cream. And you will make one for whatever object you modeled additionally, if you modeled one. If you didn't, you don't have to do it. And in this case, you'll find that it was probably a good idea to keep that object simple. If you get stuck, especially making this object here, you know, if in the end it's just a single material and that's all, that's fine. But remember, you can create a really simple spherical UV map. Chris is not going to be worried too much about texture placement, but I wouldn't put a highly detailed texture on there if it looks like garbage because of UVs. Raven asks, do you have any idea why the cake has cool different color reflectivity in the viewport? It's just the viewport having a difficult time figuring out what we're trying to do with the material, because it kind of reaches back through that material network. It starts at the material node and says, okay, we've got some sort of bump map in there. What are we bumping? Oh, we're bumping from a blend node? And so now it's trying to get some sort of an average of what information the blend node has, and it doesn't get it dead on. It gets a little bit thrown off. Because really, in the end, think of that viewport as an approximation. Okay, so that is it for your homework. A couple of other things to keep in mind. Your resolution needs to be 640 by 480. That's what it is by default. If you've changed it, then you know how to change it back. So keep your resolution of these images to 640 by 480. They do need to be JPEGs, as I've already said, and please make sure you are rendering with mental ray. Not mental RAL, but mental ray. You may add lights of your own if they help show things off, but that's not required. You can rotate around to a nice view and you'll probably be just fine. I did get a question in the last class. Somebody asked if they could create their own textures, you know, lay out some UVs, go into Photoshop and paint textures for stuff. That's fine. That's totally fine by me. How do you increase the saturation of a material? Really, that would be the color that's actually being fed into it, depending on how, I mean, that's literally how you'd handle it, by changing whatever color is driving it. The other ways would be through the attributes I discussed earlier. Being you could kick up the ambient color just a little bit and maybe boost the incandescence, maybe by multiplying the incandescence by the same color itself. And just keeping that relatively low, but those are all just options. A lot of that sort of thing is done via color correction in post. Let's see, can you turn to my screen, please? The table material has problem in my part. Let me take a look at what Florin's got going on. Autosave can be found under Save. As you go to File, Save, and look at the options box. That's where you can turn on autosave.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Delete your table.
I don't.
Delete the object itself.
Delete the object.
Yeah, nuke it. You've made it. You see, what's going on right now is you're trying to get all fancy and you want a nice beveled table. My table's just a polygon plane. All right, you don't want to nuke it. Let's go this another way. Select your table.
Delete the object.
No, select your table. Let's not nuke it. That would be my first response, but let's try to avoid that. Under your model, your polygon menu set, which you're currently on, even though you're not looking at menus, so you're probably gonna have to use your hotbox. So hold down the space bar.
Under the what?
Hold down the space bar, and this is just because I don't see your menus. So if your menus are even, I think you've hidden them, which is fine. You can use the hotbox. So, if you would, hold down space bar for me.
I am holding.
Okay, I'm just waiting for updates on my end, because, okay, there you go. I need, go down to Create UVs, which is in the second menu over. Go to Planar Mapping, and then go to the Options box.
Mm.
And again, I'm waiting for updates on my end. Okay. Now, set that to the y-axis, which is your vertical axis, and click Project. I'm waiting for the project button. There you go. And that should solve the problem. See, what happened here is that I just used a regular polygon plane, which already has nice UVs set up for it. You didn't do that. You created your own polygon object, and that had a different set of UVs.
Is it okay to submit this? Or,
Sure, it'll be.
Should I delete it?
No, it's just fine. You can submit it just like that. Just understand, you probably, I mean, depending on your camera angle, if you follow a similar camera angle to what we're going to do in our project, you won't be able to see things like those table legs or necessarily maybe even the edge of the table. But that's fine. For our purposes, that's totally dandy. At least that gets you to a point where you can see the wood grain on the table.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, anything else?
Thanks. No.
All right. Cool.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye.
Okay. Folks, that is it. That is the end of class. We have done it all. We have gone through everything. You know what you need to do. I've handled all of the remaining questions. So that is going to wrap things up for us for tonight. Thank you all very much, and I will catch you all next week. Take care, everyone.